Hello, this is Helen Thomas and the CDFM study group. I want to continue review of CDFM Module 4, Competency number 3. We are still studying out of the 2011 study guide. So let's kind of recap, how do we get to Competency 3, Resource Management? So remember the 3 DoD support systems: JCITS, Joint Capabilities Integration and Development System; PPBE, Planning, Programming, Budgeting and Execution; and the DAS, Defense Acquisition System. Those 3 systems overlap. They are used within the DoD to develop the National Defense Strategy. And what does the National Defense Strategy aim to do? It aims to meet the national security strategy. So in the JCITS process, the purpose of the JCITS system is to identify capability gaps. Once we know what our strategy is, what we want to do, now we need to figure out what capabilities do we have and what capabilities are we missing. So that's the process of JCITS. So JCITS are your Joint Chiefs of Staff of the different services. They represent the warfighter, the users. And so JCITS is run by the Vice Chairman of the Joint Chief of Staff. He is the chairman of the Joint Requirements Oversight Council, JROC. And the JROC is made up of the Joint Staff, all the military representatives. So what they do in this JCITS process, once they look at the National Defense Strategy, then they determine what type of capability gaps do we have. So they have to analyze the MLPF. That's an acronym: doctrine, organization, training, personnel, facilities, all of those material. They're looking at all those categories and they're analyzing them. So it's an analytical process where they're analyzing all of those capabilities to see where does the capability gap lies. If they identify that the capability gap falls in any category other than material, then it triggers, excuse me, the PPBE system directly. We need more personnel, we need more money, we need more equipment. So that is the PPBE process. Now, when the JROC does the analysis of the material part of the .MLPF, if they determine it requires a material capability to fill that gap, then it triggers the Defense Acquisition System. So, once it triggers the Defense Acquisition System, now it gets us to Module 4, CDFM Module 4, Acquisition. So the first part of that is a material solution analysis. But before they can analyze, they need objectives. They need an initial capabilities document to tell them what is it that we are missing and what is it going to take to fill that capability gap. The ICD, Initial Capabilities Document, is produced by the JROC to let everyone else know this was our finding, this is the capability gap, and this is the potential solution to fill the gap on the Initial Capabilities Document, the ICD. So the ICD is then taken, and then they have to then determine the different courses of action based on performance measurements, key attributes, technical things that capability needs to do, objectives that needs to be met. Once all of those are established, then several courses of actions are identified. And within the material solution analysis, the first phase of the acquisition process, you have to do an analysis of the alternative. And who do you get guidance from if you're doing a cost analysis? Well, you get it from the DK, Director of Cost Assessment and Program Evaluation. So you do the analysis of the alternative because you're trying to figure out, okay, of these different choices that we have to fill the capability gap, which one do we recommend? Which one makes more sense? So in the acquisition system, you do that in the material solution analysis. Once that is completed, the data that is produced out of that is then looked on by the milestone decision authority at milestone A. So when you study module 4, you're looking for what things happen at milestone A, material solution analysis, technology development, and so forth. So all of what I've just recapped is what you need to do when you're studying. Don't just study the material individually like it's in a compartment all by itself. Remember the beginning part that got us to where we are today, which is competency 3, is now we've identified the capability gap through the acquisition system, and we've gone to milestone B, which is the formal phase that says now we're in a formal acquisition program. We need funding. We need to pay for it. So how are we going to pay for it? Can we afford it? Those are questions that are answered or asked and answered in page 431, where it begins competency 3, resource management. All right, so that was the lead in. So the key things here, let's see. Again, I always, based on my experience and the recommendation from the instructor of this class that I received, they always said to focus on the slides in the beginning, because the slide kind of give you the important parts of that section. If you can read it, mine's in black and white, so it's hard, but the information is there. So I went through and highlighted my book for the information. What I want to point out is the bottom of page 431, the bottom left, the last slide says program affordability is part of the JACES process. So let's not forget in module 2 when we talked about the IPLs, initial integrated product list. I'm sorry. I was distracted. All right, integrated product list that you get from the warfighters. That's the warfighters also identifying what their needs are. So warfighter needs are published in the IPLs, and you got the initial capabilities document. On the right of that, you have the affordability assessments that we're going to talk about. So let's flip to page 432 at the bottom, affordability assessment. What do you need to know from there? When is it done and who does it? Affordability RM, guess what? The RM does it. So for major defense programs, and what considers a major defense program? If it's ACAT category 1 or 1A programs. So those are major automated system or a major defense system. All right, for major defense acquisition programs and major automated information system, affordability assessments are required when? At milestone B and C. And think about it, it makes sense. Material solution analysis, we're just trying to figure out which course of action. A, we're determining the data, looking at the data to pick a course of action. Then technology maturation risk reduction, we're reducing technology risk. We're kind of running the technology to see how that works. But none of those three initiates a program, an official acquisition program. It's not until you get to milestone B, when all that data is reviewed, that you need. Now I need to know not only this is the solution, my course of action, you need to come and say, this is how we can pay for it. This is what it's going to take. So affordability assessment is needed at milestone B, because milestone B is the formal acquisition phase, program, point, decision point, whatever term you want to use. Milestone B, once they approve it, they have to be able to look at what it is, affordability assessment, how much it's going to cost, and then the milestone decision authority would make the decision. Who does the, so it's done at milestone B and C, because milestone B, you're just identifying like the LRIP, low rate initial production, the quantity that you want to produce, but it's not until like milestone C when you start actually producing things. So you need to know cost update at that point. RM does it. You can read through all the rest of it, but it's done by the resource manager. All right, so I don't have nothing there. Page 436 goes into full funding. So incremental funding is not authorized when you're talking about this acquisition program. Full funding, the last paragraph at the bottom of page 436, full funding is assessed by the milestone decision authority at each decision point. And the question is, based on our expectations or plans, based on the actual, what things actually cost, does the milestone decision authority want to continue? So there are decision points after each phase in the acquisition system. So he determines when you get to milestone C, after you done run the low rate production, you produce the smallest amount, initial operational capability. Then before you can go to full, you have to have another decision point, full production decision point, to determine if you want to continue to develop the rest. A term you have to be familiar with when dealing with the acquisition system is cost as an independent variable. Once you identify objectives and those non-quantifiable things, then you want to look at the dollar amount. So dollar amount is not the only criteria, but the bottom line is when you can boil it all down to a dollar amount, then cost as an independent variable. Cost in this context refers to the life cycle cost. So remember, it's not just the cost of developing the thing, buying it. You also got to look at sustaining it. If the life cycle is 10 years for that equipment, how much is it going to cost to sustain it? Year 1, 2, 3, 4, all the way to 10. And by the way, now you got to dispose of it in a proper manner. How much is it going to cost? So the life cycle cost of that, the total cost, which should be treated equally to performance and schedule. So again, acquisition, cost, performance, schedule. Cost, performance, schedule. Those are the three criteria of things that we're looking at in the acquisition system. So on page 439, those slides at the bottom, again, leading cradle to grave, the acquisition life cycle cost. Know the difference between life cycle cost and total ownership cost. So let me see. Life cycle costs, cradle to grave, also includes overhead, general administrative costs. That's all part of the life cycle. Then total ownership means that it includes the life cycle cost and any additional costs not directly attributed to the program. So any intra-government, you got to pay a fee to start development or whatever. If it's not part of the life cycle, but it's part like a sunk cost. In order to use this facility, you got to pay some money in here, but it's not part of developing the item. So know the difference. Again, it's listed in more detail in the paragraphs, but it's always good to look at the slide and then gather the information. Life cycle costs versus total ownership costs. On page 4311, you see the diagram in the middle. So basically what this is trying to tell you is which phase, which appropriation costs the most. Which is the most expensive? Which one going to cost you more money? And based on the diagram, so they're testing your ability to read a graph. It's basically what it is. Because if you look at the graph, you'll see, okay, we got milestone A, engineering and manufacturing development phase at the bottom there, production and deployment, operations and support at the bottom, and then you have RD, T&E, R&D funds, investment, which is your procurement funds, and your MILCON is in there, operations and support costs, and then you got to get rid of the item, right? Remember, life cycle. So based on this data, you see the operation, sustaining that item for 10 years is going to be most expensive. You don't really need a diagram to tell you that. That one-time cost versus the same cost over 10 years is going to cost you. So the most expensive phase or the most expensive cost is the operations and support costs. I say all that to get to that point. So don't forget, this is an evolutionary acquisition process. We evolve to where we need to get to. We don't go straight to it. We can do single step in some cases if you already have a like item, but in the most part, we do an evolutionary acquisition process, which goes with 4312, the bottom of 4312. They talk about total ownership at the bottom of page 4313, if you kind of want to read up a little bit more on that. 4315 starts with analysis of the alternative. Where does that occur? Remember, I told you. The first phase is material solution analysis. Then after the analysis of the alternative is done, then you move to milestone A. So analysis of the alternative, where you get the guidance from the DK, which is listed on page 4317. Director of Cost Assessment and Program Evaluation provides AOA guidance, develops the study guidance. So that's that study guidance I was talking about. Before you can establish courses of action, you need to know what are the criteria. And then you develop several courses of action based on the criteria that is given. So DK. On page 4317 also, when you read through that, you see following a successful milestone decision review, the milestone decision authority directs initiation of the AOA in the acquisition decision memorandum. So once the AOA is decided in milestone A, it's just telling you there's a document created on being updated. They're not just saying, okay, yeah, go with it. So in the ADM is that document that the MDA approves whichever course of action they're going to take in the analysis of the alternative. All right, so you got the 8 elements. Page 4318, still in resource management, analysis of the alternative. The first major step leading to a successful AOA is the creation and coordination of a well-considered analysis plan. And then the plan has several things that are looked at. These are the criteria, the elements, the background, purpose, scope, scenarios, threats. You can look through all of that. Alternatives, determination, effectiveness analysis. So you can just kind of read through the list just to get a general idea of the things that are looked at. The bottom of page 4323 talks about cost analysis. So who gives you guidance on cost analysis? The DK, Director of Cost Assessment and Program Evaluation. I'm doing that because you need to know what these acronyms stand for. Because on these tests, sometimes they're just acronyms. And you need to know what are they talking about. Doesn't explain it. So they're talking about the DoD component cost estimate. Remember, the program manager gives you a program office estimate, component cost estimate, and if it's an independent cost estimate, that tells you it's at the DoD level program, because the DoD level programs do the ICEs, DK. So when you read through that again, acquisition 1 programs, 1 Delta and 1 AM. On page 4325, approach and scope, the second to last paragraph says, for programs that will be reviewed by the Office of the Secretary of Defense, Office of Cost Assessment, the program office or the program manager, is required to define its program in a comprehensive formal written document known as a cost analysis requirements description, or CARD. So that's a written document that explains what things cost. That's all it is. So the program manager has to develop a card to explain what things cost. You do your affordability assessment initially, but then as they refine the estimates, just like when you go TDY and DTS, you put in an estimate. When you finish, you go through your trip, then you have the actual cost, then you update your DTS to match the actual cost. Same thing. So the card is a document, cost analysis document, that's created by the program office, program manager. Instances when you're coming up with costs on page 4327, and I can almost get, even though I don't see whatever test version you're going to take, these cost estimates come up in any kind of financial resource management class you do. The cost estimates come up. Analogy, parametric, engineering, actual costs. So what you need to know from the diagram on page 4327 is, at what point would you use a specific type of estimate? Early on in the acquisition program or later on in the acquisition program? So that's what this diagram is. It's a gross estimate in the beginning because you don't really know. You're just ballparking it based on similar items you may have in the inventory, no items. So you got to go back to the definitions of analogy, parametric. Okay, let me see. Hold on. So they have it on page 28. So we're going to do that in a minute. All right, so let's go to page 4328, parametric. So parametric, the metric sounds like statistics, sounds like takes a little bit more time, more detail. But what the key thing is, let's go with analogy first. Analogy means I have one similar item already in the inventory, so I can take the estimated cost of this new item based on that one similar item. Parametric, when you use parametric, I'm saying that I don't have it's one item, I have several items in parts. So let's say I have a Humvee, a vehicle, I have the cost of that. Let's say the vehicle needs a GPS, I have the cost of the GPS, that's another cost. So parametric takes the individual parts and together I come up with the total. Okay, I just got that. Cost estimated techniques. Engineering, that means I have no similar item, nothing in the inventory, so I need to do individual work breakdown, specific, eaches, figure out what that cost estimate is. And then actual cost means I already have something in the inventory and this is what it costs. So go back to the diagram on page 4327. So to the left is milestone A, milestone B in the middle, milestone C. If you look at the diagram, you see early on, you can either do analogy because you have one similar item, or parametric because you have several parts of what you want to develop, and you can put all the cost of all the parts together to make the item. So you can use analogy and parametric early on. Much later on, you can use actual costs. If you already have something in the inventory, you can use what it actually costs. Or prior to the actual cost, you can use engineering. So that's how you read this diagram on page 4327. Page 4330, in contrast, quantitative risk analysis can provide a broad. So doing your risk analysis, what you need to know from this paragraph is that they use Monte Carlo simulations. So while they're coming up with these risk assessments, what they're doing is they're using the Monte Carlo simulators to determine where could a risk occur. And then once you identify the risk, what type of risk mitigation factors could we put in place? Sorry, my accent comes out, then I'm stumbling. All right, so you're looking at high risk, middle risk, low risk. So how can you augment that risk so it becomes low? Because it's going to cost you money, right? Every decision you make, there's a risk associated with that decision. Monte Carlo simulation. That's the major thing you need to know from there. Page 4331, that first paragraph, 10 U.S. Code, that's the law 2434, says that an independent life cycle cost estimate must be prepared and provided to the Milestone Decision Authority before the approval of a major defense program, right? So that's why you have all those decision points. That's why the MDA needs the cost estimates, affordability assessments, the CARD, cost analysis document. All of those things got to be approved before you obligate the funds. The specific responsibility for fulfilling this requirement for such an independent cost estimate is assigned to the Office of Cost Assessment, or the DK. USD, requested by the USD ATNL. So just remember, the USD ATNL is the Milestone Decision Authority for Acquisition Category 1 Delta, 1AM, and he designates the NII, Network Integrator. I got to look what that acronym stands for because I messed it up every time. But the Chief Information Officer is the Milestone Decision Authority for 1A, Automation Program. PM, the card 4332, that's repeated again, that the program manager creates the cost analysis requirements description. On page 4335, now this is where you make your money for the Module 4 exam, EVM, Earned Value Management. And the bottom of page 35, it has the definition. That is the tool that is used by the contractor and government personnel for them to monitor the progress, cost, schedule, performance, cost, schedule, performance of a contract. So this section is going to require you, take this stapler out, but it's going to require you to know these formulas. It's like 7 or 8 of them for this exam, because this Module 4 exam is extensive in EVM, so you need to make sure you study them. But let's go through briefly the materials in this section. Page 4336, again, it tells you it's a tool allows both the government, so the top paragraph just repeats what I just said, tool that allows the government and the contractor to work together, visibility. But what you need to know on the EVM, when does it apply? It applies for any incentive, any contract. Compliance is required on cost or incentive contract valued at more than $20 million. So anything more than $20 million requires EVM. So EVM equals 20 million. I'm just writing in my book, so I make sure that's what I point out. EVM 20 million. Now, the EVM is a management tool that does 3 things. You need to know the 3 things. It relates the scope of the work to the budget and the schedule, what we budgeted for. So no difference in if someone comes to your house to work and they give you a cost estimate and the job take 3 weeks. Okay, maybe at week 2, you look and you're like, there's no way he's going or she is going to be done by week 3. And then they're telling you they need more money. So you have to relate the scope of work to the budget and the schedule. What you said it was going, how long it was going to take, how much it was going to cost. Measures the work progress. right? I want to know, oh, yeah, you said you were supposed to have this already done, the tub already completed. States the value of the work. So what I get out of there? Scope to budget and schedule. Progress, work progress, so progress, and value of the work. Those are the three things the EVM tool provides. So when the plan integrates your work, the scope, the schedule, and all of that, and the project status is determined using the measures, then the true status of the effort is known, right? So when you monitor all of that and keep track of all of that, what's the scope? What's the budget? What was the estimate? What is the value of the work that you complete? Just like if you have a house and then you got a pool added onto the house, I expect the value of my home to go up, right? Or the value of but that's if they did the job properly. So this is kind of out of order in the book in my eyes, but I'm sure they'll catch it in the next update. On the bottom of page 4339, you see a diagram. We'll come back to the diagram because you're going to have to be able to look at such a diagram and say, is this budget on target? Is it budget over budget, on target, under budget? Is it ahead of schedule? Is it behind schedule? And how do you know that? You won't know that unless you go to pages, starting on page 40, where it starts to tell you what these acronyms are. And then we'll go to the formulas. So the formulas doesn't come in until much later, like 47. But so I'm going to kind of go through a little bit, but I want to point some stuff out. All right, so some of the terms you're going to be familiar with is on page 4340, those bullets. The budgeted cost of work schedule. So I put a budget based on how long you told me the work was going to take you. The budgeted cost of work performed or earned value. So once the work is performed, I compare it to the budget that I had for the work, how much I set aside based on the work, EV. So remember, BCWP is the same thing as earned value. Again, knock, knock, whatever I need to say. Another word for budgeted cost of work performed is earned value. Then you might have the budget at completion and estimate at completion. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So of that 5, there are different formulas associated with those. So you can read through the paragraphs under that where it explains in text what each one of those mean. Actual cost of work performed. I want to get to the point where the formulas are. So on page 4341, what I want you to take away, the second bullet, somewhere in the middle where it says percent start. So different techniques. 0 to 100% start. My book says I need to focus on the second bullet. Percent. So it's 50-50, 25-75, 80-20. The percent start per percent finish technique. And it tells you what it is. But somewhere in the middle of that paragraph, there's a sentence that says, earned value, which is another word for BCWP, is respectively realized in the reporting periods that work actually starts and finish. So this is, you could pretty much say this is one of the better methods, where when we actually, the government and the contractor actually sits down, if they use this technique, then the value of the work that they're actually looking at is based on what started and finished in that period. This technique tends to overstate performance in the first half of the period of performance and understate performance in the last half. That's what you need to know. So percent start, percent finish technique, overstate in the first half and understate in the second half or the other half of the period of performance. All right. On page 4342, the second one, weighted milestone. So weighted means everything that is not 1, 1, 1. One might be, this is 20%, 10%, 50%, because it's weighted more. Weighted milestone. And when you read through that, EV is a technique earned value for discrete work. It is the best EV technique for long-term discrete work. That's what I want to point out on that one. On the bottom of page 42, apportioned effort technique, as well as a work package. An apportioned work is typically a support task or staff function which can be tied to a discrete task or set of tasks. So apportioned. Then the last one is on the top of page 43, the least desirable. So anything that is the best, the most, you need to know, which was the 1% start, percent finish. And then the worst one is level of effort technique. Because you read it, it says it's the least desirable. So that tells me it's the worst one. So you need to know at least those two, even if you don't remember none of the other ones. You know, the first one, the second one, percent start, percent finish, overstate performance, and understates the second half. Level of effort, least desirable. All right, so let's move on to performance measurement baseline. So remember, in the start of this acquisition process, the program manager did a baseline, right? Our starting point, performance measurement baseline. So what we're going to learn in this section is that there are times when we're going to have to re-baseline, because as you're doing these analysis and you're moving along in the process and you're identifying actual costs to things, then the data is being updated. So sometimes it requires the program manager to update the baseline. But let's start on the bottom of page 4343. One of the most important steps in any EVM system is the establishment of the baseline, or the budgeted cost of work schedule. So what they just told you is there's another word for the BC. WS is the same thing as performance measurement baseline. And earlier I said BCWP is the same thing as earned value. So again, bottom of page 43 is telling you that the performance measurement baseline or the budgeted cost of work schedule is the same thing. It does not include, all right, so what I need to read here is the baseline includes undistributed budget, all summary level budget, but it does not include management reserve. That baseline does not include management reserve because the management reserve is controlled by the vendor. The vendor owns the management reserve. Whenever you hear management reserve, owned by the vendor. So the baseline PMB does not include the management reserve. For 344, paragraph, middle, or the second sentence, the most desirable earned value work scope category is discrete. A discrete work package results in tangible products, right? Tangible end items. So discrete. Classify the work. So your work, let me see, it says it there. Before I go too fast, slow down, slow your roll. Because I don't see it, but if you look on the slide on the top of 4344, you see that last one, it says classify the work, allocate the budget to work packages, and time phase the work package budget, creates the cumulative budgeted cost of work schedule. 3 categories to classify work: discrete, apportioned, and level of work. So remember we went through apportioned and level of effort. So where is discrete? Discrete was the one, long-term discrete, weighted milestone. So discrete was the one where we used the weighted milestone. All right, so baseline maintenance now on 45 is saying there are different reasons why you will revise the performance baseline. Changes, costs, changes in performance, changes in schedule. On page 4346, so now we're looking at rebaselining. There's two methods. When you rebaseline, you either replan or you're reprogramming. So replanning, so you need to know the difference. Replanning is an alignment of the schedule or reallocation of the budget for the remaining effort. Reprogramming is a comprehensive realignment of the performance measurement baseline that results in total budget or total schedule that exceeds the contractual requirements. So those are the two. When you rebaseline, you replan or reprogram. Now the party begins on page 4347, your formulas. I will advise you to have a separate sheet of paper where you write down these formulas. You have cost variance, schedule variance, variance at completion on page 4347. If you look at the formula for the cost variance, you see it says BCWP, budgeted cost of work performed, minus actual cost of work performed. How do I know what those acronyms mean? Because in the back it told me. And every time I see the acronyms, I repeat it to myself. If I don't remember, that means I have to go back because I need to know what they mean. Because on the exam, I promise you, they're going to be BCWP, ACWP, BCWS. What? So you got to make sure you know what the acronyms mean, and then you won't be so confused. What you need to know for cost variance is the BCWP, or earned value, remember that's another name, minus actual cost of work performed. BCWP minus ACWP, actual cost of work performed. And what does the value tell you? So it tells you in the first bullet on bottom of 47. If it's a negative cost variance, is unfavorable. It indicates that the contract is over budget. So negative CV is over budget. I'm writing it down. Because what I find is when you rewrite it in your handwriting over and over, you remember it better. A positive cost variance is favorable and indicates that, where you at? Positive cost variance is favorable and indicates the contractor is under budget. He's not spending up all my money. He's being cost efficient. So a positive is under budget. Schedule variance, SV, is same thing again, starts with BCWP, budgeted cost of work performed, minus budgeted cost of work schedule. And what was another name for budgeted cost of work schedule? Performance measurement baseline. All right, so the schedule variance says a negative schedule variance is unfavorable because it means that he is behind schedule. And I'm going to show you how this comes into play in a minute. A positive schedule variance means he's ahead of schedule, getting the job done quicker. And then it says a number above 0 is good, a number below 0 is bad. I like that. Straightforward. Variance at completion. What does that mean? VAC minus budget at completion equals budget at completion minus estimate at completion. So I don't know where that comes into play just yet, or if you'll have to do it. But if you look to the, let me see, because they mention it, but I didn't see EAC, right? Variance at completion. No, other than the formula being there, it's taking your back minus your EAC. But we'll look at that later. What I want to do, though, before we go any further, is go back to the diagram on the bottom of page 4339. Bear with me. So on that diagram, you see on the bottom, it talks about time, time now, completion date. On the left side, those are dollar amounts. And then it says, okay, is it on target? Is it ahead of schedule, below schedule? So if, based on this, let's say the formula for cost variance, I'm writing it down again on this page. Cost variance is budgeted cost of work performed minus actual cost of work performed. So if my budgeted cost of work performed, I look at that line, okay, I see it, that's the lower line, and then minus actual cost of work performed. So let's say budgeted cost of work performed, let's see. Okay, and the actual cost of work performed is in the middle. As you can see, the number is higher. So if you pretend that there's a number, because if the actual cost of work performed was less, that line would have been lower or below the BCWP. Let me put it that way. Let me make it plain because I'm confusing myself. Again, the formula is budgeted cost of work performed minus ACWP. In order for the answer to be positive, the BCWP is supposed to be bigger than the ACWP, right? It's supposed to be bigger to make it positive. So the fact that ACWP is above, that line is higher, that tells me that when it comes to cost, if I took this and I minus that, that this particular would be a negative number. And a negative cost variance is over budget. All right, so let's do the schedule variance. Schedule variance is budgeted cost of work performed. And let me go back to that other one, because if you notice, for the BCWP, they have an arrow. And the arrow, let's say the time, if I put numbers on it, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So I'm putting numbers at the bottom. So the arrow looks like it's between 3 and 4. So I'm going to say that's 3.5. So BCWP in this case is about 3.5. And then the arrow for ACWP is 4.5. So if you do 3.5 minus 4.5, you're going to get a negative number. So what does that mean? That means that that particular contractor is over budget. And that's just from looking at the diagram. All right, let's do the schedule variance. So the formula for schedule variance, SV equal BCWP again. But this time I'm going to mind us, because I'm talking about schedule, budgeted cost of work schedule. So looking at the diagram, we say that the BC, where's the arrow? Okay, there. The BCWP is 3.5. And in this case, the BCWS looks like it's 3. So it's 3.5 minus 3 equals 0.5. Is it on target, ahead of schedule, behind schedule? So I have a positive number because it's greater than 0. So a positive schedule variance means that I'm ahead of schedule. Okay? All right. So I wanted to show you the diagram because in some instances you may just see the diagram with the acronyms on it, and you have to be able to know based on the formula, based on what the data is telling you where these points are, is what's the example. So this looks like it's about a few questions I know you're going to get. Again, EVM is all over the Module 4 exam. That's just the easiest way to tell you. All right, so we did that. We did level of effort. We are page 47. Let's go to page 48. Page 48 looks at indices, efficiency. So not only did the costs and the schedule, your timeline, well, how efficient? What kind of quality of work did you do? So cost performance index, cost variance related as a ratio instead of a dollar amount, a ratio less than 1 indicates that the value of the work has been accomplished. It's less than the amount of the money spent. A ratio greater than 1 indicates that the value of the work that has been accomplished is greater than the amount of money spent. So really we want what is good is a ratio greater than 1. Schedule performance index, when you're comparing the index efficiency of the schedule. Schedule variance related as a ratio instead of a dollar amount. A ratio less than 1 indicates that the work is being completed slower. So if the number is less than 1 on a schedule in this index, say it, index, then you want 1 greater than 1 because greater than 1 means that the work is getting done quickly. What is the formula for performance indices? Cost performance. The BCWP and the ACWP is the same thing. The only difference now between cost variance and cost performance index is your dividing versus minus. So just to remember the formula. So cost variance, we said the BCWP minus ACWP. Cost performance index, BCWP divided by ACWP will give you your index. So that's even going back again to the same diagram. So if you take the BCWP of 3.5 and you divide it by ACWP of, and I think I said that was 4.5. 4.5. And then the value you get, if it's a positive value greater than 1, then you are the value of your work, the value of the work, not just you did the work, the value of the work is even more than what I paid for it. I have a pool in my backyard. Now the value of my home is greater than what it was before you put the pool in. That's the best way to look at it. And schedule variance the same way. BCWP and the BCWS are the same values that you did the schedule variance. Schedule variance, schedule performance index is just taking the BCWP divided by the BCWS. You want to see greater than 1 because greater than 1 means you're completing the work at a fast pace. All right, so the last formula that I know I had to deal with, which is a bigger one, on page 49. And I definitely know that I saw this one. So the estimate at completion is simply the cost already incurred by the contractor on the project plus the best estimate of any additional cost that's going to be required. This is reported in the estimate of completion. So the formula you see there is EAC equal the ACWP, the actual cost of work performed, because remember we said is we're looking at the actual cost performed, then coming up with the best estimate for what's left. ACWP plus the BAC, budget at completion, minus budgeted cost of work performed divided by performance factor. So what you need to know now is, how do I calculate the performance factor? Because the other stuff will be given. The budget at completion, that'll be given. You don't have to calculate these guys. Actual cost of work performed, given. You will have to calculate the performance factor. So the reason you need to know the performance indices, cost performance indices and schedule performance indices, is because you need that value to calculate the performance factor. So performance factor is equal to CPI, cost performance index, times schedule performance index. That will be your performance factor. Every other value will be given. EAC will be given, not EAC. ACWP will be given, BAC is given, BCWP is given, BCWS is given. Performance factor, you're going to have to calculate. The performance factor formula, and I don't know if it's on here, but it's written indirectly in here, but it's CPI times SPI. Because if you look at the bottom of page 49, you have a lower value and an upper value. So the lower value just had the CPI as the performance factor. But the EAC composite has the upper limit. So when you use the CPI times the SPI to calculate the performance factor, that is your upper limit. So I want to point that out at the bottom of page 49. I repeat, if you have to come up with the lower limit and the upper limit, the difference is everything is the same except the performance factor you use for the lower limit is just dividing by the CPI. If you're looking for the upper limit, you're dividing CPI times SPI, which is your performance factor, into that formula for the EAC. So again, you're only going to learn it if you write it down, repeat it, know what each means. Okay, so if you look on page 4352 all the way to 4356 or 55, make sure to work those problems out so that you understand the types of problem. The reason there's so many there because you're going to see these types of problems again when you take the exam. And it will not be as directly stated. Again, you may only see the acronyms. And you're going to get flustered if you don't master understanding cost variance, BCWP minus ACWP, cost performance index, BCWP divided by ACWP, and kind of have a way to remember the formulas. Then it'll make it easier for you. You will not be able to use a calculator, so the numbers are not going to be great. They're not going to be real large, but if you don't know what the formula is, it's still not going to help you. Because again, no pencil, no calculator, no phone, nothing you can't have, just you clicking buttons. And your brain will get flustered, anxiety will kick in if you don't know what the acronyms stand for or what the formulas are. So be sure to review that and make sure you subscribe to our YouTube page. Share it with others studying for their CDFM. You got to set yourself apart from other financial managers. Make yourself a professional because you're respected as a professional when you have that CDFM because everybody else has to be DOD certified anyway. So that does not set you apart. So this is Helen Thomas and the CDFM study group. Thank you for stopping by, and I'll see you guys again next time.